Another video. Purple Political Talk here. Today is Saturday, May 25th, 2024, and today we're going to be discussing a very interesting scenario. What if Joe Biden were to step down as a candidate for the Democratic Party for one reason or another, and Kamala Harris took his place in the 2024 general election? How would that look? How would a Donald Trump versus Kamala Harris scenario look like in the general election? But before we do begin the video, I want to remind you guys to like, subscribe, and to turn on the notification bell so you're up to date with all of our latest 2024 election content. Without further ado, let's get started for the video. So, first and foremost, I would like to say that the chances of this happening are quite unlikely. I think this is a very interesting scenario to discuss of how would things be different. But, chances are this is not going to happen. And even if something were to happen, Joe Biden, and he had to step down from being the Democratic candidate for one reason or another, I honestly see the Democratic Party possibly looking for a last minute nominee that, to put up in the election because, as you're going to see through my prediction, I think that Kamala Harris is one of the worst candidates that the Democrats could put out there when it comes to the general election, because frankly, she does not have support in many areas that are required to win the White House. So on the screen right now, you have my most recent electoral map. So, you have Donald Trump leading, and you have if you were just to base it off the polls, some of these margins would be a bit different, and even some state characterizations would be different, like Arizona and Michigan would be red, and then some of the margins would be a little bit more expensive. But I took this from my most recent election prediction. And if we're now to put Kamala Harris as the Democratic nominee, here is how I think things would change. First and foremost, let's talk about the Midwest. In the Rust Belt, generally speaking, Kamala Harris, I don't think has as strong as characteristics and an appeal to those voters in the Midwest that the Democrats need to win. They need union workers. They need working class voters to support them in the Midwest. And in the Midwest, those are the voters that end up making the difference. And I think Kamala Harris really fails to appeal to those voters in a way that Joe Biden has a better appeal to. Joe Biden has that appeal, and I think honestly that's what ended up winning the election. He mightn't have won those voters by a huge margin, but he got enough of them to the point where it was going to be enough for him to win the race for the White House in these states. Now, how do I think things change? I think in states like Wisconsin and Pennsylvania, which, mind you, I think are states that you already saw, you've seen polling that has Donald Trump ahead by 1 or 2 points. I think that lead expands for Donald Trump in those states. And in the state of Michigan, I do see, Donald Trump expanding his lead, and actually, based on my predictions, I think it flips. Actually, goes to Donald Trump. And again, this is all with the information that we have about the election today. I think generally in the Midwest, that would be the biggest disaster for the Democrats because their pathway to the White House is through there, and I think, notoriously, Kamala Harris would be a very weak candidate for the White House. Now, what is another state that I think flips? Interestingly enough, I think the state of Minnesota flips in a Donald Trump versus Kamala Harris scenario. Why? You see, current polling in Minnesota has shown the race actually been getting pretty close. And Donald Trump was pretty close in 2016. 2020 was a bit, more in favor of Biden. But with the way that polling is right now, I think that in an election where you have Kamala Harris at the top of the ticket, I see Donald Trump performing a lot better. And right now, I would say Donald Trump would be in striking distance of Minnesota in a best case scenario, I would say. But, and I think honestly, with Kamala Harris at the top of the ticket, you will be seeing what I would consider to be one of Donald Trump's best case scenarios in the presidential election. And I think the state of Minnesota would be very interesting, very interesting flip. But I think it also speaks to how Kamala Harris's appeal is pretty weak. Now, I do think the Democratic Party, if something like this were to happen, they would more likely than not nominate someone from the Midwest to be the vice presidential nominee, because frankly they need it. And I think that's where Kamala Harris's big weakness comes in. And I think the other problem with Kamala Harris is frankly she is not liked across the board. Her approval ratings are far lower than Biden's, or her favorability ratings rather. And you could have made the argument somewhere in 2020, like Kamala Harris definitely helped with some turnout in places like Georgia and things like that. But I think regardless, you're probably going to end up seeing a Trump victory. And I don't think her at the top of the ticket really changes or shifts the needle in any really significant way in favor of the Democrats. Rather, I think it pushes the election further into the Republican column. Similarly, in the state of Arizona, I think that we already have polling here that shows Donald Trump ahead by 4, 5, 6 points. With Kamala Harris at the top of the ticket, I think for sure Donald Trump wins the election. And you see, a couple years back, I had thought that Kamala Harris would be a decently interesting candidate and strong candidate that could appeal to voters down in the Midwest. But I think, over the last couple of years, we've been able to see her favorability with voters, and it's been very low. And I think put that together with all the things that she's going to be associated with if something like this were to happen with Biden's presidency, which, we have to remember and we have to go back to the basics. When the economy is doing poorly, or Americans perceive the economy to do poorly, the incumbent party is always going to end up, paying a good price for that. I think in part the economy was a reason why you could say maybe Donald Trump lost in 2020 after the pandemic, but to a greater extent, I think Biden faces that. And polling consistently shows American voters, they trust Donald Trump more with the economy than the current administration. And frankly, I think a lot of voters would see Kamala Harris, not only as a part of the administration, a part of the group that really caused all of the things going on right now, but you would also see voters, having that greater degree of unlikability. And I think the area of the country that you're going to see the biggest impact in a scenario like this, if Biden were to step down as a candidate, would be the Midwest. And honestly, like that would almost guarantee a Donald Trump victory at this point. But this is all very hypothetical. I don't think this would really happen. But if it were, I think we would be in for a very interesting election cycle. And I think the Democrats would do some unpredictable things. And they would definitely have to change up their strategy, because right now the Democrats' pathways, like I said before, to the White House are tied to the Midwest. Joe Biden is, as of right now, one of the few people with national recognition that could go into the Midwest and, at least to a certain degree, compete with Trump. Right now, he's down in the polls, but that does not mean that he's not competing. He's clearly he's really competitive at this point. And the White House is ultimately going to be decided by the Midwestern state. So it's going to be very interesting to see what ends up happening. But what do you think down in the comments below? Do you think that Kamala Harris does better or worse than Joe Biden? Do you agree with this prediction? Do you think that if Kamala Harris was the Democratic nominee, if something were to happen to Joe Biden, do you think that she would perform? Do you think she outperforms my prediction? Do you think she does even worse? Do you think she could flip other states? And something I didn't mention, states like New Hampshire maybe could go into the lean column, not into the 2-point column, but maybe +4 or +5. But what do you really think about Kamala Harris, and how would she fare off as a general election candidate? So I think this is a very interesting scenario, and I'm really excited to see what you say down in the comments below. But with that said, I want to thank you guys so much for watching this video. If you want to stay up to date with our latest election content, remember to like, subscribe, and to turn on the notification bell so you're up to date with every single video that we post. And yeah, so thank you guys so much for watching, and goodbye.